Well, good evening once again from our NBC News headquarters here in New York. Day 1098 of the Trump administration. 286 days to go until the 2020 presidential election. House Democrats started their marathon opening oral arguments in the impeachment trial, laying out why they believe Donald Trump should be ousted from the White House. The impeachment managers from the House have a total of 24 hours, over 3 days, to make their case. Today, importantly, they used about 7 hours, 15 minutes. Their goal: to convince a Republican majority Senate that the president is guilty of high crimes and misdemeanors, abusing his powers and obstructing Congress.
President Trump withheld hundreds of millions of dollars in military aid to a strategic partner at war with Russia to secure foreign help with his reelection. In other words, to cheat. The president's misconduct cannot be decided at the ballot box, for we cannot be assured that the vote will be fairly won.
As President Zelensky was taking power, Mr. Giuliani was already engaged in an effort to convince Ukrainian officials to announce 2 sham investigations.
Following Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2014, the United States has stood by Ukraine. When the funding for this security assistance came up for a vote under this roof, 87 of you voted for the aid. President Trump did not think the aid was important last year. He ignored you and the direction of Congress.
As a former chief of police, I think it's quite interesting that Ambassador Bolton categorized the corrupt scheme, the pressure campaign, as a, quote, drug deal. We need to hear from Ambassador Bolton, and I know the American people want to hear from Ambassador Bolton as well.
On the July 25th call, Mr. Trump could have endeavored to strengthen the relationship with this new Ukrainian leader. Instead, President Trump focused on securing a personal favor.
The truth is going to come out. We can and will prove President Trump guilty of this conduct and of obstructing the investigation into his misconduct. But you and the American people should know who else was involved in this scheme. You should want to know about every player in this sordid business.
Here for our leadoff discussion on a consequential Wednesday night, Claire McCaskill, former Democratic senator from the state of Missouri, Jason Johnson, politics editor over at The Root, former U.S. Attorney Joyce Vance, who spent 25 years as a federal prosecutor, and Chuck Rosenberg, former U.S. Attorney and a former senior FBI official. Good evening and welcome to you all. Senator, knowing that chamber as you do, were any minds changed as of tonight?
You know, my sources, my friends on the Hill who I've talked to electronically since they adjourned tonight, and I think Chuck Schumer confirmed this. At the end of Schiff's presentation tonight, the Republicans were listening. He gave a pretty powerful closing 40 minutes. And I think, and maybe this is just, I want it this way, that there will be at least enough senators to decide that it's time to have documents and witnesses at an actual trial. You know, there's 3 choices when somebody's accused of wrongdoing in this country. The person accused can say, I did it, have mercy on me. Clearly, Trump is not going to do that. You know, you could say he did it, but it's not impeachable, have mercy on him. Or I didn't do it, and I've got evidence. DNA evidence if it's a criminal trial, alibi evidence if it's a criminal trial. Well, they don't really have the evidence that he did not do it. So the third option is you haven't proven it. Now, the irony is, in this case, they're unable to maybe prove as much as they need to prove because the person accused is holding the evidence and refusing to give it to them. And when you think of it in that context, it is such a miscarriage of justice. Maybe the most blatant and obvious miscarriage of justice that this country has seen in a very long time.
Don't forget that the president this morning in Switzerland bragged that the Democrats don't have anything because they have everything.
I've got the material, they don't.
Jason Johnson, when I ask you to sum up the day, please also keep in mind a kind of domestic politics battle damage assessment and how many times we heard the word Biden today.
Right. Biden comes up a lot. Here's the thing. Donald Trump, the showman, is not listening to his own advice. I watched an old interview with Chris Matthews and Trump talking about Clinton's impeachment in 1998. And he said, look, you should have these witnesses up there so that you can tear them down. You know, the way that Bill Clinton has been sort of dealing with Paul Jones, and it doesn't make any sense. Trump should listen to his own advice. By basically encouraging Mitch McConnell to keep witnesses out there, he's giving the American public 2 straight days of him being proven guilty. The way Adam Schiff put together basically a video montage of Trump more or less admitting that he's guilty. What I noticed is trending, not just that impeachment is trending on Twitter and social media, but Adam Schiff rocks. Is trending on social media. You don't want to turn the Democrats into superstars. So I think domestically, this has been an absolute screw up on the part of Donald Trump. He is not getting the kind of circus that he wants. He's not getting the opportunity to defend himself that he thinks he's going to get. And this is going to get baked into the cake. No matter what kind of performance and shenanigans and bread and circuses Jay Sekulow and some of his other defenders are going to come up with later, it's not going to beat the fact that you got a sober 2 competent days of reasonable Democrats saying, you guys know he's guilty. We all know he's guilty, and here's the video evidence.
And Joyce Vance, to Jason's point, is there anything Adam Schiff did? Is there any way he put anything that you wouldn't have done?
I thought his performance today was absolutely brilliant. I mean, Chuck and Claire and I have all seen our fair share of good lawyers. I would put him up there at the top of the list. And he did something that I thought was so brilliant and so telling when it came to obstruction, where he would say, he would reference something, for instance, the first person cable that Ambassador Taylor sent back to Washington, and he'd say, don't you want to hear what's in that? I want to hear it, but I can't read it to you because Trump's administration won't turn it over. And he built those references that showed the impact of obstruction in a way that I thought was very telling. You know, Pat Cipollone, Trump's lawyer, did something in his opening statement that we've all heard a lot of defense lawyers do. He said, by the end of this case, by the end of this trial, you will not have heard any evidence that proves that the president did anything wrong. That is clearly not the case. In a criminal trial, juries hold lawyers who overpromise like that accountable. The Senate probably won't, but I wonder if the American people won't pick that up, in large part because of Schiff's brilliant job today.
Chuck Rosenberg, if you say things often enough and in the right context, sometimes, just sometimes, they break through. One of those things that has broken through over the past 48 hours is when someone says on occasion, this was an attempt to corrupt our next election. And as a patriot, I know it breaks through to you.
Oh, absolutely. I was already convinced of that, however, Brian. I mean, I hope people are listening to what the House impeachment managers are doing. I agree with Joyce. I think they've done a brilliant job. Something that Mr. Schiff said today really resonated with me. You recall when the proceedings were in the House, we heard from a lot of credible and candid and courageous witnesses, Fiona Hill and Marie Yovanovitch, Bill Taylor and George Kent. What Mr. Schiff said about them today was the following. They testified at risk to their careers. They were willing to tell you what happened, even though there might be adverse consequences to them for doing so. And then he looked at the Senate gallery and said, you ought to be courageous, too. If they can risk their careers, and it wasn't quite, this specific, you can risk yours. Look at what these American patriots did, Brian, in telling you what happened. Listen to them, pay attention to them, heed their word, and be as courageous as they were.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.